Hello and welcome back. We're bringing to you now kind of an overall look at the college basketball landscape so far. And the first question I want to ask you um, is this year Gonzaga against the field? And I know that's weird to say because Gonzaga's traditionally is a mid-major, but they've kind of grown the program into where they don't really fit a mid-major anymore. They're more of a powerhouse team.
Um, I don't know if it's Gonzaga against the field. I think it's maybe Gonzaga and Baylor against the field. I think maybe in a couple weeks when Baylor gets into their Big 12 play and maybe struggles a little bit, maybe it could be Gonzaga versus the field because we've seen Gonzaga beat a few top rankings already, Iowa, West Virginia. But right now I think it's Gonzaga and Baylor against the field because I think Baylor has shown that they are right up there with Gonzaga from what we've seen. But I mean, you watch Gonzaga, they just they don't have a flaw. It seems like they don't have a weakness. They don't have a thing to point to try to exploit. Like they don't have it. And I thought Iowa. You go back to the game against Iowa the other day. Like I thought Iowa played pretty well. I thought that was a good game that they played, but like, there's nothing you can do when Gonzaga shoots that well. There's nothing you can do when Gonzaga gets as many transition and fast break points as they did. Like, there's just some things that they were doing where it's like, there's just like that's just a good team.
Mhm. I agree with you there. I even would spread it further. I mean, I know a lot of people are saying right now Gonzaga is definitely the best team. I'm not sure. I still really like what Baylor's doing, like you mentioned. I think there's also some other really good teams out there. But there's an interesting thing that I saw in that game. Gonzaga actually missed 19 layups and dunks in the game, and they still scored 99 points, which is unreal. When you miss that many easy points, it's like, okay, you probably lost the game. You probably didn't have that successful of an offensive game, yet they still pulled up almost 100 points. Something that's kind of unreal. But also, I kind of want to, with that, next question I have, what's an under the radar team right now that you think could still compete with the Baylors, the Gonzagas of the world, that's kind of flying under the radar a little bit right now?
Um, I mean, it depends on how far down of an underdog you want to go. I think a team that you can kind of look at as maybe a traditional basketball team that I kind of like what I've seen is Houston. I think Houston has great guard play. I think they have good coaching. I think they're a team that I I mean they're not a complete underdog because they're ranked sixth in the country right now, but they're not a traditional basketball school. They're in the American Conference, so they're not like in a great basketball conference. But I like what I've seen so far from them. They have a good win against Texas Tech. Um, they've had a couple COVID issues, but I think they're a team that could maybe kind of give Gonzaga and Baylor some fits. And then also, I think West Virginia. I think West Virginia gave Gonzaga a good game early on in the year, and I think that could help them because you've already played them once. You know what you need to work on when you play them again. But I think West Virginia is going to get the benefit of playing in the tough conference like the Big 12, playing against Kansas, Texas Tech, Texas, playing these good schools, and then getting to March and if they do face a Gonzaga, being battle tested, because that's my concern for Gonzaga is right now is they're playing a tough schedule, but are they going to fade off as they get into conference play? They start playing lesser competition, winning every game by 30 points. How are you going to look when you get into the NCAA tournament? But I think Houston and West Virginia are kind of be my two teams that they're not huge like dogs right now because they're both ranked pretty highly, but two teams that I think just they're not traditional blue blood basketball programs that could give Gonzaga a run for their money.
Yeah, I think always the worry for Gonzaga that you mentioned about is getting into conference play and then running over everybody besides maybe a BYU, St. Mary's, but you run over everybody else, and everybody's worry going into the tournaments usually, hey, how ready are they with winning all these games so easily? But I do agree with you on Houston. I think they're an underrated team. I mean, I know they're ranked sixth, like you mentioned, but they're still kind of underrated. Not in a power conference necessarily, but they do have some very good teams in that conference. You got Wichita State, you've got Cincinnati, you've got Memphis, you've got Houston. You know, these are some traditional, I mean, Houston, Memphis, Wichita State are traditionally pretty good basketball schools and can help test these Houston. But I think when you're a team like Houston, too, when you've got, you know, older guard play, it can really take you far in a tournament. Anytime a team gets older guards into a tournament, they can really get things going because they're experienced. They hold the ball majority of offensive possessions and can really break down defenses, do a lot of things. They're a team that I like too. I do like West Virginia as well. I like Villanova still. I know that's not necessarily underrated, but they've always got good guard play, it feels like, and they do a lot of good things defensively as well. Another team kind of under the radar in a very strong conference, I think, is Wisconsin. I know they lost the game to Marquette where they didn't look great, but outside of that, they've had some really good games, and they're also the most experienced team in the country. And again, when you have that experience, come March, it really does help. It really does go volumes for a team when you have those guys who've been in those moments and they're like, they've been in those down the stretch moments and they've experienced it all before. So they're another team that I would keep an eye on. I know the Big Ten's tough. I mean, we've seen, you know, two of the top teams go down already with Michigan State, Illinois. But I mean, you're going to have to grind out that Big Ten um, night in, night out, which leads me to my next question. Is the Big Ten the best, or do you think maybe the Big East or Big 12 even could have something to say with that?
I mean, as a Big 12 fan, I'm a little biased. I will be honest. I might. I love the Big 12 because I think Baylor, Kansas, West Virginia, and Texas, 4 teams in the top 10, are all really, really solid teams. Texas is another team I'd throw in there. It's a team to look at when got Gonzaga later in the year. Good guard play and have some good bigs. Um, I think the Big Ten is maybe a little bit deeper because they're going to have more ranked teams. They're going to have a lot of teams that are kind of moving around a lot. But I think the Big 12 is better just because I haven't liked what I've seen from Wisconsin. I mean, you mentioned they're an older team, but I maybe it's the style of basketball. Maybe it's they haven't played a lot of good teams this year, but it's just they haven't really impressed me. I don't know if I'd put them up there in the same category as Texas and West Virginia yet. Um, but I mean, you look at the Big Ten. Obviously, Michigan State has the one loss, but they have a couple good wins already. Rutgers has looked pretty good this year too. But I think I'm still going to go with the Big 12 just because I think the Big 12 of having those top 4 teams in the top 10 and then Texas Tech right on the outside. Those are 4 really, really good teams, and then Texas Tech is a good team that plays defense, rebounds, plays hard, and that's a tough team to win come tournament time, come March, and so on. So I think I'm going to go with the Big 12, and it's probably a little homer bias pick of me, but I think those top 4 teams in the top 10 are really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, I'd even throw in the Big East into that mix because you've seen a team like Xavier who was picked towards the bottom of the conference before the season started, and you've seen what they've done. Granted, they haven't played the best teams, but they've played good major teams and have come away with wins in those games. So they're a little battle tested. They've played some games that go down to the stretch and they need big plays down the stretch. You've got Villanova. I'm very high on them. Creighton's another very good team. UConn's done some nice things so far. Seton Hall and Providence are no easy outs in that
Mhm.
conference as well. And then you got Marquette as well, who has looked decent at times. Got the big win over Wisconsin. I think they're another conference that's deep, but maybe not as strong as a Big 12 at the top. And I agree with you. The Big 12 at the top is very strong. I'd even throw Texas Tech into the mix too. They're not necessarily on the level, I would say, of a Baylor, Kansas, or even a Texas or West Virginia, but they're right there with them. They're close to that level, and they're another team that could give you problems come tournament time. Whereas, like the Big Ten, like we mentioned, it's very deep, but there's not a clear-cut best team in my opinion. And I think every night you're going to get a dogfight no matter who you play. And it's going to be whoever's playing the hottest at the end of the year that's probably going to come out on top in the Big Ten. So I'd agree with you. I think the Big 12 at the top is probably the best. I'd say the Big Ten is probably the deepest, and I'd even say the Big East is probably the next deepest because you still have tough outs. Even playing St. John's is a tough team to
Yeah.
play, go there, play, you know, twice a year. Same thing with the Georgetown or Butler. You're not necessarily wanting to play those guys twice a year.
Yeah, yeah. The Big East I think has looked pretty good. I think they have their. I always like the Big East because I always think of the old Big East.
Mhm.
And now obviously you add in teams that are outside of the Northeast like a Creighton and Butler and Marquette who have been nice additions to them. But going back to the Big Ten, I just like I said, I don't really know if I like Wisconsin yet. I don't really think that they're a team that I'm gonna put in the top 10, even though they're ranked ninth. Um, I think Michigan. I don't know if I know what Michigan is yet. I don't think that they're gonna be. I don't think they're gonna finish the year where they're at now. They're ranked 19th. I don't think that they're gonna finish that high. I think they'll fall, kind of fade away. And then you kind of look like the Big Ten's just got a lot. Like the Big Ten's got 14 teams in it, but I think when you really boil it down, I think it's Rutgers, Illinois, Iowa, and Michigan State. I think those are your top four teams in that conference. I think everyone else is kind of just there. Obviously, there's gonna be a lot of tough games. Going to Ohio State still gonna be tough. That's still a decent team. Going to Michigan and Wisconsin, like those are still good teams. But I think when you look at the top against the top of the Big Ten, those four schools against the top of the Big 12 against their four schools, I think that the Big 12's top four are better than the Big Ten's Big Four, um, or top four. But then I agree with you about the Big East. Like Villanova, Xavier, Creighton are the top three teams ranked in that conference. And then I think if you throw in a Marquette and a Seton Hall, like that's a good four teams. But I think overall, if you're looking at the top of each conference, I think the Big 12 is the best. I think those four schools, the top of the Big 12, have shown who they are, with who they've played, how they've won games. I think those are good, the best top four teams in any conference.
Yeah, I agree with you again. I mean, everybody talks about the Big Ten being the best conference this year, and I think it's just the deepest. Again, we've said it a couple times now. There's not many easy games in that conference. I mean, there's so many
Yeah.
teams, but there's also just not many easy games. You've got a lot of decent teams, not a lot of great teams. Even
Mm-hmm.
the top four you mentioned, I think the only great team out of that top four so far that I've seen is Iowa. Outside of that, I think Illinois is good. I think they're going to cause problems for a lot of people, but I don't think they're necessarily a great team. I think they still have some flaws, still things to work on. And same with those other two teams in the top, like a Rutgers. I just think they have more things to work on than the top teams in the Big 12. So I agree with you there. And I kind of want to talk about a mid-major conference that I've been big on all year. That's not the Missouri Valley, but the A10 and what they've been doing. I really like the A10. I think right now Richmond's actually playing or just finished.
They lost. They
Yeah.
lost today.
So they actually just lost a game to Hofstra at home. Kind of a surprise. But I still like what the Spiders have done. They're still a very experienced team. very good teams. I really like what SLU's done. They lost their first game the other night to Minnesota, but they're still a very good team. We've been watching them. Rhode Island's a tough team to figure out. They've played a lot of good teams. They've got a decent amount of losses, but they've hung around in those games, and they're a tough team to figure out. I think they're going to be a tough out in the A10. Dayton's looked pretty good as well. They've got some experienced guard play. No Obi Toppin, like we've mentioned, but they're still a very good team. They got the older guard play that you typically like to see from those mid-major teams.
Yeah, you've been high on the A10. I don't know if I'm as high on them. I think once you get outside of St. Louis and Dayton, and Richmond, I think it's kind of I just don't know if I like the rest of the conference. I know VCU sitting there at 6-2, and um, you have a couple teams sitting there at 4-3 wins. But I guess to me it there's just a lot of teams in here that I think are just kind of middle of the road average teams. I guess I'm not as high on the A10 as maybe you are. But I do think St. Louis, Dayton, Richmond, and VCU are four good teams. And I think when you look at like St. Louis and Richmond, I think are the two best teams in that conference. Those are going to be two tough teams. Later in the year, I was watching the St. Louis Minnesota game the other night, and the way they pressure the ball, have that little 3/4 court press, and just defend is I mean, that's a tough team to play against if you struggle turning the ball over, if you struggle with pressure. And I think that's, Travis Ford's a coach there. I think it's Travis Ford. It's the old Oklahoma State head coach. That's kind of what he ran at Oklahoma State, that some intense defensive pressure. But I don't know. I guess I'm not as maybe as high on them as maybe you are. I don't know if there's a conference outside of the Valley in terms of mid-major that I'm really high on. I will say a conference that I kind of want to talk to, because I feel like they don't get any love, is the Pac-12, and we haven't really talked too much about them. They don't get a lot of talk about, a lot of publicity. But I think there's some good teams in the Pac-12 this year. I've watched a couple UCLA games. I like what I've seen from Mick Cronin's group at UCLA. They're starting to figure it out quite a bit. Arizona State's a fun team to watch. I think they're kind of struggling right now, but they have the experienced guard play that we've talked about that you and I both like. They have Christopher, I believe he was like a top 20 recruit for them. And then the team that I'm really impressed with, that I think is getting absolutely no respect, is Colorado. Colorado has played really, really good. They have a really good guard. Can't think of what his name is right now, but a really good guard that they can lean on. And they're not ranked now, but they have been dominating some of the teams they've been playing. They just beat Washington the other day by like 25 points. So I don't know. I feel like we need to give the Pac-12 some love. I really like what I've seen out of them. I know they're not a mid-major conference, obviously, but I feel like that's a conference that could have some good games. Kind of their top. Oregon's not where they usually are. Arizona's definitely not where they used to be, but there's some good players. There's some good future NBA players in this conference, and there's some good teams in this conference.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to you about the Pac-12 a little. I know UCLA and I think it's Arizona State both lost to San Diego State. But I told you, I mean, I think this conference is actually very good, and it's underrated this year. I agree. I think it's actually very good this year. I think they should get 5 to 6 teams in this year, and I think out of those 5 to 6 teams, 4 of those teams could definitely make some noise. You mentioned Arizona State, UCLA, Colorado's playing well. They've surprised me. I think Stanford's another team that's playing very well that could run up on some teams, that could surprise some teams. I think USC also, they've got some talent over there that could surprise some teams. And I agree with you. Oregon's not what they're usually, but you add them into the mix. I think that's a very solid group. And I think they just don't get enough love because in recent years they haven't really performed like the Pac-12 teams of old that we're used to, winning the titles and stuff like that. I do think some of these teams could make a Final Four run, especially when you look at a UCLA. I think they're a team that could make a Final Four run, and I don't think a lot of people respect them as much as they should. Again, they lost that early game to San Diego State, but San Diego State's a very good team, so it's not like they're losing to some nobody. So I do agree with you. I think it's underrated. I think they should get at least 5 teams this year. They've got a lot of talent out there, like you mentioned, NBA players or very experienced guard play on some of these teams, like a
Mhm.
Colorado. So I mean, they don't get enough love, and it's kind of the same situation as football. But I think once they start to get rolling in conference play, and these top tier teams really kind of separate themselves, they'll get more respect, they'll get more love, especially in the polls and the rankings. And I think again, you're going to get probably 5 teams out of at least 5 teams out of this conference because it's a conference that I like coming into the year, and I thought, Mick Cronin's doing great things. I like some of the younger talent there at Stanford and what the coach is doing there. I like Arizona State, the style they play with
Mhm.
Hurley, things like that. I mean, there's good teams that I wouldn't want to play if I was a Power Five school, and I just think they get kind of overlooked because they're on the West Coast.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Walton does his best to remind us about the Pac-12, but yeah, I mean, they're on the West Coast. People don't stay up to watch them. They play late at night. It's tough. It's a tough thing, um, but I think the ability, if they were to get 5 teams into the NCAA tournament and to have 5 teams playing on national TV and in the tournament and a chance for people to watch them would be great for them to have, because then you get that exposure and you get people buying back into the Pac-12, and especially if you get those traditional power blue blood schools like a UCLA um, back up to a top 25 team every year, that's really going to help them, because that's what people want to watch. And UCLA's been down, and Oregon, or excuse me, Arizona hasn't quite been what they used to be in the last 4 or 5 years. It seems like it seems like all these Pac-12 teams always get these good recruits, and they get the hype going into the year, and then they're kind of just like, yeah, they're not really that good, like they kind of fall down. They don't really meet expectations. You think about all those Arizona schools, it would be like, man, they got the number 3 recruiting class. They got all these good teams. They are good players. They got 3 or 4 guys coming back from last year, and then it's a second round, loss. And so it's just, I think, the Pac-12 is an opportunity this year where it's a little more balanced. It's a little bit more even to get a team like a UCLA, or get a team, like that can represent them well in the NCAA tournament, because ultimately that's what people want. They want to see a UCLA do good, and I think Mick Cronin's done well. I mean, they lost to Ohio State the other day in a dogfight close game, and that's Ohio State's ranked in the top 25, and that's the kind of level that I think UCLA is at right now. Is they're up there in terms of potentially being a top 25 team.
Yeah, and it's kind of a similar situation as like I mentioned with the Valley. They need to win more of those games that they're not supposed to against
Hmm.
Ohio State. Or I mean, Oregon was supposed to beat Mizzou earlier in the year and they fell flat. So I
Hmm.
mean, those games kind of help you prop up the conference again. Again, I do think it's a good conference this year. And I think part of the problem that they've had in recent years is they haven't had the coaching necessarily, but I think you've got some better coaches in that conference now. You've got the Hurley, you've got Mick Cronin, you've got these guys that are younger guys that built a good mid-major program. Now they're going and they're building and bringing their culture to
Yeah.
these power schools. And I think it's going to, I think this is the year you start to see that happening and you start to see them do well in the tournament because I do think they've got some good coaches there too. And the guy out of Oregon, Dana, isn't it
And
Dana Altman?
yeah,
And yeah,
yeah, Altman.
you've got some better coaches there now. So I think it's not as one-sided of a league as it's been in more recent years. So I think you will see some good things from them this year and years to come because I think you're now getting these younger coaches to implement their system, their culture, their philosophy, stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. They're starting to get some good young coaching in there, and um, I mean, ultimately, I think it's just they just need to keep that exposure out there because they've gotten some good players going through that conference in the last few years. And you look at this year, like Stanford got a top 100 recruit. That's like
Mhm.
Zaire Williams Day. I think that's his last name, right? Williamson. He's a great young guard to watch, and then Christopher from Arizona State, a great shooting guard to watch, and then you have the Moberly brothers playing, both are 5-star recruits out at USC. Like there's these really fun guys to watch in the Pac-12, and now you have these good recruits with this good coaching with at these fun blue blood schools that you want to see, like UCLA and USC and schools like that. Like, I think it would be great if they could get 5 teams in and get some opportunities. But yeah, I think you're right on it. It goes back to you got to win the games that you have, and it's playing in these big games on national TV during weeks like this where it's a lot of people, the holiday weeks where everyone's watching, and it's winning games like that help keep people wanting to watch Oregon and UCLA and Arizona State, and they haven't won them in recent years. They haven't won those games. They haven't sent teams to the Final Four. They haven't done enough on the national exposure to really make people want to stay up and watch them.
Yeah, and I think back to your point about them getting, these guys in years past, these really good recruits, not doing too much with them. I think what was happening too with those is you saw a lot of ISO ball where it was that guy just by himself trying to do too
Mhm.
much. Kind of what you're seeing at Oklahoma State right now with Cade Cunningham. And I think that's what was happening in the Pac 12 schools. But now you've got these coaches, and it's not as much ISO ball. I've watched Stanford play. They don't play ISO ball with Zaire Williams. I've watched Arizona State play. They don't do that either. They don't, just ISO their
Mhm.
guard Christopher. They've got Remy Martin, a very good point guard. They've got some other pieces too that are good there. UCLA is a very well-rounded team. USC, you mentioned the two Mobley brothers. They don't really play that ISO ball either. It's still a well-rounded team, and I think that's the key now. Is it again? It starts in the recruiting process, getting those guys, but not just one guy. Now they've got multiple guys that can actually go out there and produce for them. And it's more of a team system out there
Mhm.
versus in more recent years, I think it was a lot of ISO ball. And there weren't really teams out there. There were, individuals that were fun to watch. I mean, you saw Washington produce like first round pick after first round pick, but they were bad teams.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean that's yeah, and it's like tough to watch because like for someone like me, like I follow the recruiting, I follow where these guys are going, and it's like Washington, Arizona, you know Oregon, even like you're seeing like guys go to these schools, and you're like, man, I can't wait to watch them, and then it's like you don't really get to watch them, and then you follow the NBA draft, and then you see, oh man, like guy went 10th overall from Oregon. It's like, well, I didn't really get to see him play, or when I did get to see him play, it was kind of like you mentioned, ISO ball where he's taking 15 shots a night, and it just was kind of bad basketball. But yeah, I think that the talent's always been at these Pac-12 schools. I just now, like kind of you mentioned earlier, you're getting these good young coaches in there, like Hurley and Mick Cronin, that are making it fun to watch. And we kind of thought we were going to see this when USC hired the Florida Gulf Coast coach that had Lob City or whatever it was called. They hired him, and we kind of thought we were going to see this fun style out west with all these recruits out there. We never really saw it. And it's just kind of like we thought we were going to get that, we didn't. Now we're kind of getting it with Mick Cronin and Hurley. So I don't know. I would love to see these games more on TV, and I think if we were to see some more of these games, I think people would start to see the talent that is in the Pac-12, and the players that people want to see. And it's not like these teams play bad styles. Like Arizona State's a fun team to watch, man. They get up and down, they shoot the ball, you have Remy Martin act like Steph Curry out there. Like that's a fun style to watch. And um, I would like to see the Pac-12 more on national TV and like we said, win those games when they're on national TV.
Yeah, and it's been tough for them too because being out west, there's not too many teams that want to either A, travel out there, or B, you want to travel all the way out into the Midwest, to the South, stuff like that. So it's been a tough year because you do have these COVID issues. And I think it's kind of hurt the Pac-12 more than anybody else because there are so many teams on the East Coast and there's so many teams in the Northeast that are good.
Yeah.
There's so many teams in the Southeast that are good, in the South, in the Midwest, stuff like that. Whereas like the Pac-12 is kind of on an island, and it kind of hurts them. But I think once you get into the Pac-12 conference play and these quality teams start to really separate themselves, they'll get more love, they'll get more exposure, and more people will take notice. And I think come down to March, you're gonna look at 3 to 4 teams out there, probably Stanford, probably UCLA, probably Arizona State, and maybe even throw in an Oregon or USC. Those teams, you get them into the tournament, there's not going to be a lot of teams that want to play them.
Yeah, and I think you talk about the kind of like the traveling with the COVID issues. I think that's one of the issues we did see this year. Usually the Pac-12 gets a couple teams in the bigger non-conference tournaments. Stanford, I know, was in the Maui Invitational. And, we kind of get to see that last year. We saw Oregon play Memphis in I don't even remember what it was now. But like we get to see those games early on, and we didn't quite see them this year. So now it's just a little bit different. But yeah, I think the Pac-12 is going to be a conference to watch if you can get some games on national TV, and then come NCAA tournament time, getting to watch some of their games. I think there's some good players and some good teams in that conference.
Yeah, so kind of for our closing remarks, I guess I'm not sure what I really want to do, but another team that we've kind of talked about decent amount that I just kind of want to hit on quickly too is Western Kentucky. They've played a pretty tough schedule to start the year. They've really impressed me, and I think they're just a team that everybody should watch out for. Especially, they're kind of like Gonzaga, they're kind of going to fade away in conference play because they don't play in a great conference. I think they're going to handle their conference pretty easily. But they're another team I think could make a deep run. So for closing remarks, do you want to take a look at the schedule the rest of this week leading up to Christmas?
Yeah, we can do that. I'll kind of go off what you just said. A team I kind of like that's maybe a little under the radar is Liberty Flames. Obviously, former Bradley Brave Scotty James went there, kind of had some success with them. They're another team I think that is kind of dominating some of their non-conference schedule teams. They're playing some of the higher-ranked teams, or at least Power 5 teams that they're playing close. So I think they're going to be a team that's going to be kind of fun to watch. They were a trendy pick last year with NCAA tournament being, I think they were a 12 seed playing a 5 seed. But yeah, we can get into kind of what we got coming up. I don't know if we want to touch on we kind of touched on the Bradley game already. There's a few games tonight on Tuesday night here that I'm really excited to watch. First off, being a Big 12 fan, I'm going to start with West Virginia and Kansas. Really excited for that game, top 10 game. West Virginia struggled with Iowa State I think on Friday night when we were recording. There's a lot of good teams in the Big 12 this year, but the Big 12 still runs through Lawrence. This is a game where obviously West Virginia, if they want to be a legit contender, has to at least keep close and if not win. So I'm excited for that game. And then I'm excited to I'll touch on a Big 12 or a Missouri Valley game other than Bradley. I'm excited to watch. Let me pull it up here real quick. What big game are you excited to watch tonight?
There's actually a pretty decent slate tonight. I think there's two games that I think are ranked at unranked that could be pretty good. Texas Tech at Oklahoma. This is kind of a bounce back spot for Texas Tech. I expect them to come out and kind of put the tempo on Oklahoma early. Lon Kruger's usually got decent teams, but I think they're a little down this year. So I would hope to see Texas Tech bounce back in a big way there. I think North Carolina at NC State has the potential to be very good. I think NC State's had some COVID issues so far early on this year, but they're starting to get their guys back, and this is a big spot for them at home early on in conference play. Could be a big spot for them. They've got some good players. Got a guy out of St. Louis, Jericho Helms, who's done pretty well for him so far. And then I'll give you a kind of underrated, under the radar game that I think has some interest too. Is I'll give St. Mary's at San Diego State. San Diego State, another team, a team we've talked about. They've got some good wins. St. Mary's, a team we haven't really talked about, but actually has some decent wins. They beat Northern Iowa when they had A.J. Green still healthy. They also beat South Dakota State, a good team, as we know, as Bradley fans, who's had some good wins. So I think that could be an interesting game to look out for today as well.
Yeah, that was a game I was trying to find. Was going to give that one out too. I think I said Missouri Valley, but I meant Mountain West with San Diego State. But yeah, that's a game I'm looking forward to, kind of an under the radar game, just because of San Diego State's got some good wins on the year. St. Mary's some good wins as well. Also, shout out to Jake Masters, friend of the podcast. Iowa's playing Purdue at home tonight. Always fun to watch Iowa because they're going to score 100 points. So I think that's going to be an interesting game to watch because I think Purdue's kind of a team that you think traditionally can match up with Iowa. They usually have a good big, usually have some experienced guard. So I think that game could be interesting to watch. I like the North Carolina State game and state rivalry. I think that game. I mentioned it last time we talked, I believe, about college basketball. I like North Carolina as a team. I think they don't shoot the ball well. It's kind of their kryptonite, but they have some good bigs, which is a great asset to have. And I like some of their guard play that we've seen from them, even outside of the shooting. But I'm excited for those games. The only other Valley game going on tonight, Loyola won and Indiana State won. Bradley plays tonight, and then Drake plays as well. So some decent slates for the Valley.
Tomorrow,
no game on. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. But tomorrow there's a decent midday slate as well. In my opinion, you've got Xavier at Creighton. Speaking of the Big East at 2:00, that's a big one there. You got UCLA at Oregon in the Pac-12, 2:00.
Speaking of Pac-12 games, national TV, 2:00. Everyone should be tuned into that game. A chance to watch two good teams playing each other. That one, yeah. That Xavier Cincinnati game, I'm excited for that one. We've talked a little bit about Xavier, obviously beating Bradley earlier in the year. Chance for them to pick up a really, really nice road win. They had a good win the other day to open up their Big East Conference play. That's a good game. And then you got a 3:30 game, Rutgers going to Ohio State. Rutgers coming off that Illinois win. Be interesting to see what we see out of them against kind of an up and down Ohio State team this year. Even though they're 6-1, but they're getting they got EJ Liddell back, and they should, I think, get Seth Towns back, which would be a nice pickup for them if he's able to come back for that one. Another game, I don't want to say this is under the radar game for me, but I think this is a game that maybe won't be on your main screen, is Villanova at Marquette. Speaking of the Big East, Marquette is a team I think that can match Villanova's guard play. DJ Carton obviously is the guy to watch for Marquette, but excited to watch that one. Marquette's kind of been up and down. They've kind of gotten the good with the bad there, but I think that's going to be an interesting game to watch. A ranked team going on the road is always kind of those games you want to tune into because you usually get the home team's best effort. So I'm excited to watch that game too.
Yeah, Marquette's kind of been up and down this year. You don't really know what you're going to get out of them. One game to the next, you saw them beat Wisconsin, and then they've had some letdowns as well. And Villanova, again, a team I'm high on. So really excited to see that game, see what we get out of that. On Christmas Eve, there's no games. Christmas Day, the last day we'll talk about, we've only got Big Ten games, but it's a pretty good slate. You got Wisconsin at Michigan State to start the day. Then you got Maryland at Purdue, Michigan at Nebraska is a decent game, not great. And then Iowa at Minnesota could be a very good game as well.
Yeah, I know Minnesota kind of gave Iowa fits, I believe, last year with Okoro on in the inside. We'll see how Liam Robbins handles Garza, former Drake player there. But yeah, Christmas Day. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of games going on Christmas Day. You got some college basketball. You got an NFL game. You got some little bit of college football, and of course the NBA. So um, I think that'll be a chance to be a really good day of sports all around, not just the NBA. But um, got Valley games tonight, and then I don't think they play until next Saturday when we open up conference play. So probably by the time we meet up again, we'll have some more uh, games under our belt with some of these Valley teams, and be able to kind of see how the early standings look, kind of what we think of our early kind of early thoughts are on some of these teams as we start to get into conference play.
Yeah, Valley play, once you get into Valley play, a couple games in, you can really start to see the conference start to take shape because sometimes there's some misleading records going into the Valley play. I know, for instance, Evansville last year was 9-4, and I think they lost every single Valley game. So there always tends to be some misleading records. It'll be interesting to see how things go. Very good slate coming up this weekend as well in college basketball. Some big games there. Very excited for that. It's bowl season. Starting to get to conference play in basketball. All systems go. We wish you guys happy holidays and thanks for tuning in.